Thanks, team. Isn't it awesome that we can sing these songs and know that there is a God, and that's what we believe here at Gracegate, who really cares about us. No matter what we're going through, no matter our struggle, no matter the valleys or the highs that we go through, there's a God who is for us. And so I hope you know that, whatever you may be wrestling through today, navigating through in life, that there is a God who cares about you. And that's why we're speaking about this series on prayer, because if He's for us, then we want to connect with Him. We want to reach out to Him. We want to have a relationship with Him to understand, to get guidance, to get wisdom, to understand His presence in our lives. And so, we started the year off. If today's your first day, we kicked off the year with a series on prayer. And we've been saying, hey, start your day with coffee and, most importantly, prayer. And over the couple of weeks, we've looked at various different prayers that are found in the Bible that help us and encourage us how to actually pray. We looked at a prayer by a guy called David where he really just is really, authentic and vulnerable in front of God. And he says, God, search me, search my heart, figure me out, God. Show me the blind spots in my life. Show me what I'm hiding. And we saw another prayer where Jesus kind of, teaches his disciples, those who were following him. He gives them a model prayer of how to pray. And we saw in that prayer that it is our best interest to actually declare God's glory first. Understand who God is and give Him all the glory, and then to surrender our will. And when we surrender our will, it's so much easier because we've declared who God is. And then we can also ask for His pardon, His protection, and also His provision in our lives. And then last week we said, well, if we're speaking about prayer, prayer isn't just about us talking, right? If it's a conversation, we also have to do what? Listen. And we figured out that a lot of us aren't good at listening, all right? But we said, hey, if we really want to connect with God, then it would be in our best interest to create a space and a time where we can actually be still and we can actually listen. And we learned from the story of a young boy who was only 12 years old who said, hey, speak, Lord, I'm listening. I'm attentive. I'm positioning myself to hear you. And so today I want to ask the question, how are you going? How are you going? If you've been here from the beginning of the year, today is the 28th of January. How are you going with your vision for growing in your faith, or your vision for actually strengthening your prayer life? How are you going maybe with some of the goals that you have set in the beginning of the year in the context of maybe making some New Year's resolutions? How are you going, all right, when we come to the end of the first month of January? I'm wondering. I saw this quote and I thought I have to share it with you. Someone posted this online and they said, January is a test run. We go for real in February, right? Unless February is also bad, in which case it is a rehearsal for March. So how are you going? At the start of the year, I had this vision. I really want to grow deeper in my faith. I really want to spend more quality time with God and praying and connecting and listening. And already I find myself just chasing the wheel, right? Just too busy, just running around. There's too much on my plate. How are you going? How are you going at connecting with God? Today I want to start off and let you know that maybe we're in good company with some of the guys who were closest to Jesus, because there's a time where Jesus is actually kind of at a point in his life where he's going through one of, the most traumatic times of his life, because he knows what awaits him. And he encourages his disciples to come with him and actually watch him pray. And I want to share this story as we start today. It's found in the book of Mark. And check what happens here. It says, they went to the olive grove called Gethsemane. And Jesus said, sit here while I go and pray. Jesus calls his disciples with him and he says, hey guys, I want you to sit here as I go and pray. And then he says he took Peter, James, and John with him, and he became deeply troubled and distressed. He chooses his inner circle, his closest mates, and he says, hey guys, I want you to come with me. And as he's, walking with them, he's becoming more anxious and more distressed about what awaits him. The next verse says that he told them, my soul is crushed with grief to what? The point of death. In other words, he is at his lowest point. He is like anxious. He's stressing. There's fear. There's anxiety in his life. And then he invites the disciples. He says, hey, stay here and keep watch with me. In other words, guys, I need your support and help. I'm going through something that I've never gone through in my life, and this is difficult. I don't even know what I'm feeling, and please, I need your help. Can you come and watch and pray and be with me? Has anyone ever asked you to actually pray for them before? And maybe you sent a text message and you said, hey, I'll pray for you. Maybe you heard of a friend who's going through a difficult time and you said, hey, I'm so sorry to hear about what you're going through. We'll pray for you. And then never prayed. Has that ever happened to you? Today, I just want to be really honest that there have been times where I've said to someone, hey, I'll pray for you. And guess what I've done? I've not prayed for them. I said, hey, that's really hard to hear, and I'm sorry about what you're going through. We'll pray for you. And I just sent it on a text message, and I didn't pray for them. Here, Jesus invites his disciples to come watch him and actually pray with him and check what happens. He went on a little further and fell to the ground. He prayed that if it were possible, the awful hour awaiting him might pass him by. So in this anguish that he's feeling, and he knows that he actually is going to the cross. And so he's kind of pleading with God here that this would pass. Please, can you just take away this mission that you have for my life? He speaks to God like this. He says, Abba, Father. And I love this because we see that God is a relational God here, that we can approach him as our Father. And he says, he cried out and he says, everything is possible for you. Everything is possible for you. There is nothing that is impossible for God to do. No matter what you're navigating through in life, if you don't remember anything else I said today, remember this, that everything is possible for God to do. Jesus believes this. He prays this. And then he goes on and he says, please take this cup of suffering away from me. And then one of the most important prayers that we could pray, he goes on and he says, yet I want your will to be done, not mine. He acknowledges who God is, and then he also says, I believe that you can do anything. Anything is possible through you, God. Can you take this anguish, this pain, the suffering that I'm feeling away? But also, God, your will be done, not mine. In other words, I'm surrendering, I'm trusting you. Jesus gets up then and he returns and he found the disciples, guess what? Asleep. He said to Peter, Simon, are you asleep? Couldn't you watch with me even 1 hour? Isn't that crazy that Jesus has his closest mates with him? He's shared everything he's going through in life, and he invites them just to watch and pray, just to be there for him. He moves a bit forward, he goes and he prays, and he comes back. It's not even an hour later, and guess what his mates are doing? They're asleep, right? They just don't get it. Have you ever felt that your closest friends don't get what you're going through? What you're navigating through? Jesus, he then goes on and he says, keep watch and pray so that you will not give into temptation, for the spirit is willing, but the body is weak. It's interesting that in this story, Jesus then goes back to pray. He comes back and he sees them still asleep. And he just leaves them then sleeping. Yeah, he says, then keep watch and pray so that you will not give in to temptation. If you want to know why we're speaking about prayer, why we're encouraging everyone to start their day with prayer, it is because we have to navigate through life. And if you've been around for a while, you know that life has so many challenges, right? So many hurdles, and as Jesus would share, so many temptations where we go off the rails, where we think we're on the right path and we find out that, hey, that wasn't the best for us. And even, he says, for the spirit is willing, but the body is weak. In other words, like prayer is a good thing to do. Like we know that. We understand that, but to actually do it, I mean, that's a bit harder. Why doesn't it just come naturally? Even the disciples, Jesus' own followers, the guys who were closest to him, fall asleep when he encourages them to watch and pray. Have you ever fallen asleep while you're praying? Maybe late at night, trying to just get your thoughts out, and next thing you know, you're in dreamland, right? Yeah, even Jesus' closest disciples fell asleep when they're praying. So how are we going? How are we going? If we really want to try and start our day with prayer, how are we going to get there? How are we going to actually get better at praying every day? Today I want to share a story about a guy who I think is an incredible role model. And there's a few key pointers in his life that I think that can really help us to understand what we really can do to help us in having a lifestyle of prayer. And this guy's name is Daniel. Daniel was an Old Testament prophet. In other words, he lived before the time of Jesus. And when Daniel rocks up on the scene, it's actually the Babylonian Empire had just came and they had conquered Jerusalem, the city. And Daniel was an Israelite boy, and some of the Jews were actually taken captive. And some of the young boys, those who were actually the most promising, or they looked like they would actually have a great future, they had strength, they would actually take these boys under the Babylonian Empire and they would try and indoctrinate them and pretty much educate them and raise them in the Babylonian way so that they would actually become soldiers on their own team. And so this is Daniel. This is Daniel's lifestyle. He is one of those young boys who is taken captive, and he grows up then in the Babylonian Empire and in this kingdom. And there's a few stories that we see in the book of Daniel where him and his friends get offered all the delicacies of the kingdom, in other words, to help them become more like the Babylonians. But Daniel stands firm. He stands firm to his faith, and he says, hey, actually, I'm not going to eat of that stuff because I believe it will defile who I am. We have some religious laws, and I actually don't want to eat that stuff. And, they're all blown away because they say, well, you're going to be weaker. And they find out that these guys are actually 10 times stronger than all the others. And so Daniel, from a very young age, he stands out from the crowd. And there's a time in his life where the king, King Nebuchadnezzar, has this crazy dream. And he is actually asking for people to come and interpret the dream for him. And he can't find anyone in the whole nation who can interpret it. And until he comes to David. And Daniel. And Daniel's first response, guess what his first response is? He says, hey, we're going to pray about this and we'll come back to you. We're going to ask God for help. And so Daniel goes and he prays to God with his friends and he says, hey, God, we really need to figure out how to interpret this dream for the king, or otherwise actually our lives are going to be taken. And God reveals to him the dream and the interpretation. So from a very young age, we see that Daniel has a theme throughout his life, and that is that he is really consistent in his faith. He was always proactive in his prayer life, and it was always his first response when it came to difficult situations. So I want to pick up the story. It's later on in his life, and it's at a time now that Daniel is with another king. It's King Darius. He's the leader at this time. And he gets actually asked, Daniel is invited to be one of the 3 administrators of the whole empire. And so Daniel is one of those 3 administrators. And look what the Bible actually records about his life. It says, Daniel soon proved himself more capable than all the other administrators and high officers. Because of Daniel's great ability, the king made plans to place him over the entire empire. This was unheard of, that this guy, Daniel, this Jewish boy, all right, who had grown up now, that he would actually be one of the administrators, and he was top of the class. All right, he was the standout. He was more capable. He had great ability. And so the king sees this and he's like, man, I want him in charge. Check what happens then. It says, then the other administrators and high officers began searching for some fault in the way Daniel was handling government affairs, but they couldn't find anything to criticize or condemn. In other words, this guy had no dirt on him. Isn't that incredible? That Daniel lived his life. He was such a guy of character that when the king actually decided, hey, I want to put him in charge of everything, of this entire empire, and the other people got jealous about his position, and they decided, hey, we're going to go and sniff. We're going to go and dig into all his past. We're going to go into his Facebook accounts, his ex-girlfriends, his whatever, to try and find some dirt on him. And guess what? They find nothing in the context of Daniel's life. And this is what it says. He was faithful, he was always responsible, and he was completely trustworthy. Isn't this an incredible person of character? I mean, isn't this the person that you would say, hey, yeah, you can babysit our kids, no problem? Isn't this the person that you would hire first off, hey, you have got the job? Because, I mean, come on. He was faithful. He wasn't just responsible. He was always responsible. And he's not just trustworthy, he's completely trustworthy. Daniel, yeah, we can see he is a man of such great integrity and character. And therefore, why wouldn't the king actually say, hey, I want you in this position? And so then the story goes on, and we see that, so they concluded, our only chance of finding grounds for accusing Daniel will be in connection with the rules of his religion. In other words, these guys who were against Daniel, who actually wanted to take him out, who were jealous of him, they said, hey, the only way we're going to break this guy, the only way we're going to get something against him is if we go for his faith, if we go and attack his faith, because this guy is so consistent when it comes to his life of faith. And so that's what they do. These administrators, they go to King Darius and they say, hey, King Darius, you're an incredible king, man. You're the best of the best. Like there is none like you. You're the greatest goat ever. And they say, you know what you should do? You should actually create a law that says that no one is able to worship any other gods or images or statues or anything except you, so that you can see how powerful you are. And King Darius, hearing all of this, he said, hey, sounds like a great idea. Why not? I'm the king, right? And so he seals this law. He signs it. And then for the next, I think it was something like 30 days, no one was able to worship any other god. And so we know what happens, right? Daniel was consistent in his faith. He was faithful in his faith. And let's see what happens when Daniel finds out about this law change. It says, but when Daniel learned that the law had been signed, he went home and he knelt down as usual in his upstairs room with its windows open toward Jerusalem. Isn't this crazy? that Daniel, there's a law that has been set for the entire country, for this entire empire, that they are not allowed to worship any other gods except the king. And Daniel decides, hey, I'm just going to do what I usually do. And so he goes to his home, he kneels down in his upstairs room, he opens the window and he faces Jerusalem. And then it says he prayed 3 times a day, just as he had always done, giving thanks to his God. There's so much in this that we can learn. There's so much that we can grab from Daniel's life here, right? That in this time where probably most of us would be cussing and cursing, blaming the government, and like so upset about this law change, Daniel, the first thing that he does is what he usually does. He goes back to his home, he kneels down, as he usually does, prays 3 times a day, but most importantly, look what it says, he gives thanks to his God. I mean, how deep, how close to God do we have to be that when we're faced with one of life's biggest challenges, that we're going to be put to death if we do this, he still decides, hey, God is worth thanking, and I'm going to do that. I'm going to go on my knees and I'm going to pray. And so, unfortunately, those administrators, they see Daniel doing this. And so they go to King Darius and they say, hey, you know that law that you created? He says, they found Daniel and he's worshiping his God. We saw him 3 times a day. And King Darius is really upset about this, because he actually really loves Daniel. He loves to have him on his team, and he tries to, get out of it to protect Daniel, but these guys persist and they say, hey, you can't go back on the law that you've created. You can't go back on what you've actually signed. And that law actually that he signed was that if anyone actually was to worship another god, they'd be put to death. And the way that they'd do that is he would be thrown into this lion pit. And so they go and get Daniel after he's been worshiping and praying, and they throw him into this pit. And this incredible story takes place because the king is so sad about what happens, and they all disappear for the night. And the next morning they return. And the king, when he comes to that pit, he actually says, hey, did your God rescue you? Did your God, Daniel, rescue you? And they open up the pit, and guess what? Daniel's still alive. A miraculous thing happens that God sends an angel to touch the mouths of these lions so that they actually don't even see Daniel as an appetite. And so Daniel gets rescued. And look what it says later on in the passage. It says, the king was overjoyed, and then he ordered that Daniel be lifted from the den, and not a scratch was found on him, for he had trusted in his God. Here's this incredible story, and whether you believe this story or not, there's some vital principles and truths that we can actually gain and learn from Daniel's story. A good question that we should ask ourselves is, when did Daniel learn to trust in God? Do you think Daniel learned how to trust in God when he was in that lion's pit? I kind of doubt it, right? But maybe Daniel learned how to trust in God in his daily walk, in his daily rhythm, in those daily times where he'd get down on his knees and he'd give thanks to God, and he'd know, hey, my life is secure. No matter what happens, no matter what the circumstances around me, how they change, I believe in a God who's for me, and I'm going to trust in him. There's a few things that I've jotted down that I think we can learn from Daniel's story, and especially in the context of prayer and how we can get better at prayer. And the first is this, that he prioritized prayer. Daniel prioritized prayer from an early age in his life. If you want, you can go read through his story, and it's found in the book of Daniel. But he prioritized prayer. In other words, This was his first response to any situation that he would face. And that's why we're trying to encourage all of us, myself included, like wouldn't it be in the best interest of ourselves to actually start our day with prayer? To start our day with prayer. Prioritize prayer. In other words, we actually need to schedule that time in. If we just think about it and if we just think that prayer could be a good thing, but never actually schedule it into our day, maybe put it into our calendar, maybe create a time for it, then actually we'll probably never do it, right? But yeah, Daniel, he prioritizes prayer. And so what do you have to do to prioritize prayer? It's interesting when I thought about this because, I prioritize coffee almost every single morning. Every single morning. This week we were at a staff retreat, and it was interesting that in the van that we were in, we were going somewhere, and we even had to make a detour to prioritize coffee because we all needed it before we went on our adventure for the day. Come on. How easy is it for us to prioritize things that aren't even that important, but when it comes to prayer and the life-giving things that will happen as we speak to God and as He speaks to us, like we would be fooled if we don't prioritize it, right? Think about the things that will shift in our thinking, in our thoughts, in our day, in our interactions, if we decided, hey, I'm going to continually prioritize prayer. So what do you have to do to prioritize prayer in the morning? Maybe it's not making sure that your phone's next to you when you wake up. Maybe it's chucking some of your shoes under your bed so that, when you're off to work or uni or whatever it is and you're looking for your shoes and then you realize, oh yeah, they're under the bed, you're getting them and you're on your knees and you're like, hey, it's time, let me pray. Let me speak to God. Let me just take a moment. Daniel prioritized prayer, and honestly, I think the thing that's so important about this is that when he was faced with one of the most difficult seasons in his life, he had so much courage and strength to embrace it because he had this daily rhythm of connecting with God. Another thing that we can learn from his life is that he had a place. He had a place. As the story goes, we see that it was in his home. It was upstairs. It was the same place. He had a place where he connected with God. And so one way that will help us to be more consistent in our prayer life is to determine actually where are we going to pray. Let's make a place. Let's create a space. Maybe it's a chair. Maybe it's a couch. Maybe it's outside. But have a place where hey, when I go there, I'm going to connect with God. I'm going to pray. Have a place. Maybe it's a place where that always has your coffee at, right? That hey, if I go there and I drink my coffee and I sit on the chair, then that's my place where I start to connect with God, where I speak to God, and when I spend a few minutes just listening. He had a place. And then lastly, we see that he loved the process. He loved the process. And today I hope that as, we speak about prayer, you won't see this as burdensome or as something that is just something you have to do, but actually that you will fall in love with being devoted to connecting with your Heavenly Father. And he loved this process. If he didn't love connecting with God, and in his case 3 times a day, guess what he would have done? As soon as that law would have come in, he would have said, whew, I'm out. Sweet. Right? But he didn't. Even when the law came in, he was like, man, I love this process. This is the feeding of my soul. And I think the reason he loved the process so much is because he knew the why behind it. Sometimes I grew up in church and sometimes prayer was just this, religion. It was just this religious thing that we did. It was just something we did before our meals. And if we didn't do it, we're like, whoa, we didn't pray. There's so much more to that. Daniel knew what the why was. He understood that prayer was something so life-giving that would help him in every aspect of his life. He knew that prayer was a thing that would change his thinking. He knew that prayer, although sometimes not changing his circumstances, it would help him to understand it and also have the courage and the guidance and the wisdom to embrace whatever the day faces him. I think he knew that prayer changes his posture when it comes to dealing with difficult people. And so that whatever the day may hold, he knew that if I connect with my God first, it's going to be easier. I'm going to be more gracious as I have to navigate through relationships throughout the day. So what's your why? What's your why? Why do you want to connect with God in prayer? Why would it be valuable for you to start your day with prayer? A couple of weeks ago, one of the things that we've been doing with our daughter Harper is we've been praying with her. And so every single night before we put her to bed, Zols holds her and she's got her bottle, and then I'd say a prayer for her. And then I leave the room. And she's almost 2 now. And just the other night, it was late and she had been really tricky in the day. And so, we were like, let's just get her to bed, you know how it is. All the parents know. And then I was like, well, got a bottle and we're not even going to do a prayer. And I was walking out the room and she said to me, Jesus. In other words, Daddy, come back. We need to say the prayer. And so we did. And now we're trying to start this time of devotion where in the evening before she goes to bed, we actually, do some worship together. We sing some songs. We read a passage out of her Bible book, and just helping her because we know that, from a very young age, we know what is going to await her in life, right? The challenges, the difficulties, the struggles, and what a joy and what a life-giving thing would it be if she could see that there's a God who's for her, cares about her, loves her, and wants the best for her life. So today, I want to encourage you. If you haven't kicked off January well in the context of prayer, and it sounds good, or maybe you like the disciples and you find yourself actually sleeping, or maybe even texting someone saying, I'll pray for you, but never actually pray for them. Why not become like Daniel? Get more consistent in your rhythm of prayer. Try 1 day, try 2 days. If you miss a day, it's okay. It's not about perfection, but it's about progress, and it's about, just making that the more consistent I am, and even if it's just a small amount of time, start off with maybe 5 minutes, and then build up slowly, maybe 5, 10, maybe 15 minutes. And I can guarantee you, as you start your day with prayer, you're going to see God in a whole new way, and you're going to have the strength and the courage to navigate anything that awaits you through that day. So God, today we thank you that you are listening to us, that you speak to us. What an incredible example Daniel's life is. An incredible leader, a leader who was so consistent in his faith. And we see that maybe the catalyst of that was actually him spending time with you each day. And God, if we could have a glimpse of his rhythm in our lives, we know that that will transform so many aspects of our life and what we navigate through. So we pray, God, that you will give us the courage and the wisdom to actually implement that. Help us to start our day with prayer, even if it's just a glimpse of listening or speaking to you, God. We want to hear from you because we know that will be so helpful and most importantly, life-giving for our souls. So we praise you today, God. Thank you that we can talk to you, that you're a God who wants to hear from us, who wants to be there for us. You are not distant. And so, God, we want to respond and help us today is our prayer. In Jesus' name, amen.